Chapter 30-40. Wilhelm and Crush alongside Felix made their way towards Arturia, who was now standing by herself and unsheathed her sword. They were surprised by the last attack that was about 2 times bigger than Arturia's first attack. Wilhelm looked at Hakugiai's body that was approached by the troops and had a rather sad expression on his face. Arturia noticed that, so she said, "Apologies, I took your chance of revenge." Wilhelm looked at Arturia with a surprised expression and then looked at Reinhard. Reinhard shook his head as he closed his eyes, telling Wilhelm that he didn't say anything. That was why Wilhelm closed her eyes and then opened them again to look at Arturia. There was a small smile on his face. "Pendragon-sama, please don't apologize to this old man." Wilhelm went down on his knees and looked up at Arturia. His sudden behavior surprised Arturia, but Crush and Felix just smiled at the old man. "This Wilhelm will eternally be grateful towards you for avenging my wife. I have not enough strength to defeat the whale by myself, so this Wilhelm is grateful towards Pendragon-sama." Arturia looked at Wilhelm with steeled gaze. She understood what Wilhelm meant. She put her hand on Wilhelm's shoulder and smiled. "Please raise your body, Wilhelm. You are Crush-sama's butler, not mine. You could only bow your or kneel at your master, don't do that to other people. I will accept your gratitude, so now raise your body and head." On the side, Crush looked at what Arturia did and nodded her head. She was charmed by Arturia's charisma. "Oya, Crush-sama," Felix said in a joking tone from behind Crush as she covered her mouth with her right hand. "Are you by chance amazed by her Naya?" Crush, who had always been teased by Felix, responded seriously, "Yeah, she had a charisma what it took to be a king." Arturia Pendragon, although she said she was chosen and forced to be a king of her homeland, I thought that someone like her will become a good king. Wilhelm raised his body and then smiled at Arturia. "Surely, that was the case. Then, please ask me anything when you need it, I will help you if your request is within my capability." Arturia nodded her head and looked at Wilhelm as the edge of her lips tugged up a little. "I will, Wilhelm. For now, how about we took the proof of the subjugation and then took plenty rest before going back to the capital?" "That's a wonderful idea. Then I will excuse myself." Wilhelm put his hand on his chest and bowed to Arturia. He then turned away and walked to the troops to help them dismantle the Hakugiai. Reinhard, that stayed silent all this time, suddenly said, "Milady, please allow me to leave for a while. I believe that I have something to do." Reinhard bowed his head at Arturia with his hand on top of his chest as he said that. Arturia looked at Reinhard and nodded her head. "You are allowed to leave. Make sure to do that something with conviction, Sir Reinhard." Arturia smiled at him as if she knew what Reinhard thought inside his head. Reinhard raised his head and smiled wryly. "Of course, milady. Then I will excuse myself for now." For the last time, Reinhard bowed his head to Arturia, then made his way towards the Hakugiai too. The 3 people were left and Crush approached Arturia. "Good work, Arturia-sama." Crush raised her right hand and praised Arturia. Felix, who stood behind Crush, raised his right hand above his head and shouted, "That last attack was amazing, Naya. That was like boom. How did you do that? And, Reinhard was able to accumulate mana near you without disturbing your attack, that was strange." Arturia just smiled wryly at Felix and said, "Well, the way I used mana is different from other people." She scratched her cheek as she answered Felix. "Different? Also, your attack had a golden glow. Could it be that you had yang, light, element Naya? That was rare." Felix's curiosity caused him to get excited and shout at Arturia. Arturia was a bit uncomfortable with that, and she could only smile wryly. If only Felix was not her rival's knight, she would happily tell him about her ability. "Ferris, stop that. That's rude." Felix lowered his hand and then bowed at Arturia. "I'm sorry. Don't mind it, it was natural to be curious about something that you don't know. Let's just say that I use a special meant to use mana around me." Arturia put her left hand on the handle Caliban and made a gesture with her right hand. "Use mana, was it?" muttered Felix. "Come to think of it, how did you know that Wilhelm had a grudge with Hakugiai? Did Reinhard tell you about that, Arturia-sama?" Crush asked Arturia with a curious tone. She then turned to look at Wilhelm in the distance. Surprisingly, Wilhelm stood there with Reinhard on his side while looking at Hakugiai together. "No, he didn't," answered Arturia. She then followed Crush's gaze and looked at Reinhard. "Sir Reinhard just told me about Wilhelm, but he just said that Wilhelm was his grandfather. He didn't tell me something personal, as I prefer that my knight have some privacy for himself. I just assumed that Wilhelm had a grudge towards Hakugi from his action when we fought Hakugi side by side. Not only that, the tone that he used towards Sir Reinhard when I was about to unleash my attack, I know that Wilhelm lost someone important to him from that. Arturia explained the reason why she knew about Wilhelm's vengeance toward the Hakugi. Crush was impressed by her sight, and she smiled as she looked at Arturia. Is that so? You are amazing, Arturia-sama. Arturia looked back at Crush and said, you are amazing too, Crush-sama. Your leadership when you ordered the troop was top-notch. Not as much as you, replied Crush. They were talking some other things as they looked at the troops that finally dismantled the Hakugi and took its head and horn. The troops began to make their way towards the place where they dropped their equipment with a smile on their face. With this, we can announce that the expedition is over, right? Asked Crush as she looked at the troops. Arturia nodded her head shortly, but the bad feeling that she had still lingered in her mind. I hope so, thought Arturia. The expedition team began to pack up their things after putting the head of Hakugi on a big cart. Arturia was watching them packing their things from distance. Crush had left Arturia alone near the flugel tree because she was needed to manage the troops so that they can work well and efficiently. Reinhard made her way toward Arturia with a smile on his face. Arturia smiled back at him and asked, how did it go? Are you able to fix your relationship with Wilhelm? Reinhard stopped beside Arturia and answered, yes, thank you very much. It seems that he was willing to talk to me again. All of this was because of you, milady. I didn't do anything. You achieved that by yourself, Sir Reinhard. No, milady. It seems that you reminded him of his late wife. He was able to see himself in me when I protected you at that time, so he kind of forgives me for my mistake a long time ago. Is that so? Then that's good. As Arturia said that, her expression turned into a worried one. She remembered the bad feeling that she got when they slew the Hakugi, and even now that bad feeling was still lingering in her mind. She kept looking at their way back to the capital and put her left hand on Caliban's handle. Reinhard noticed Arturia's expression and gesture. He put on a serious face and asked, is something matter, milady? Arturia tried to hide her uneasiness with a smile, but then she remembered something important. If she didn't trust her knight, then who should she trust? That was why Arturia erased her smile from her face and looked in the direction of their way back to the capital. I have a bad feeling, Sir Reinhard. This feeling didn't go away since the start of our expedition, and it further enhanced after we slew the Hakugi. Are you sure it's not your imagination, milady? Reinhard tried to assure his lady that it was all alright, but he himself put himself on high guard. He will believe in the feeling of his lady and didn't deny it rightfully. Even if no one believed his lady, he will be the one who always believes in her. No, Sir Reinhard. Unfortunately, my intuition had always landed in the thing that I believe it to be. Something like this happened a few times, and I believe that this time there will be nothing different from the usual. That means something bad is waiting for us on our way back. Should I scout the area, milady? Arturia touched her chin with her right hand and then nodded her head. Please, Sir Reinhard. If there is nothing wrong, come back to me as soon as possible. But, if you encounter some problem, please run away. We will take a different path instead of fighting them. Reinhard nodded his head. He put his right hand on his chest and bowed a little. Please leave it to me. Reinhard turned away and then called his ground dragon. He saddled it and then the ground dragon ran toward the direction of their way back. Arturia also called her ground dragon and saddled it. She asked the ground dragon to make its way toward Crush and the other and she joined the troops. After a few minutes, the troops had done with their preparation, and Crush ordered a sortie. Alright, let's go back to the capital. Crush shouted towards the troops and they replied with an energetic shout. All of the troops' wounds were healed by the healer and Felix, they were in their highest and best condition after resting for a few hours. Crush asked Arturia about Reinhard while they were surrounded by the other people, and she answered that she ordered Reinhard to take care of the monster on their way back to the capital. Crush's eyes widened and then she smiled at Arturia while thanking her for the consideration. The troops were marching at a slow speed because there was no need to hurry, so the best thing they could do was to preserve their stamina and enjoyed their way back to the capital after creating history. Arturia was on the front of the troop with Crush, followed by Wilhelm and Felix right behind them. They had separated for a bit from the troops behind her, and then Crush suddenly asked. Arturia-sama, why did you lie to me when I asked where Sir Reinhard was? Arturia turned to Crush and smiled. I don't want to make the troops worried over nothing. The truth is, I ordered Sir Reinhard to scout our way back because I had a bad feeling about something. Bad feeling? Why did you base something based on your feeling, Arturia-sama? Are you afraid that someone will attack us? No one with a sane mind will attack us with this much army on our end. Arturia also agreed with Crush, but her bad feeling still lingered in her mind even now. But Sir Reinhard didn't come back to me yet. With the speed of his ground dragon, he will reach the capital faster if we compared it to the time that we took to get to the flugel tree from your mansion. Come to think of it, he had gone for over an hour now. Forgive me for butting into the conversation, but the path to the capital is long, and there are lots of forests that need to be checked. I believe taking a long time to scout the area isn't strange at all, Crush-sama, Pendragon-sama. Wilhelm gave his opinion from behind. Arturia looked at him and saw him bow his head a little. Also, we don't need to worry about that kid, he will be fine. I know that Sir Reinhard would be fine. I am worried about the troops if we encounter something that made me this restless. Answered Arturia. She looked up at the sky and saw the sun had lingered right above her head. They are in the middle of the plain, so the situation in their surrounding was clear. Hey, who's that Naya? Felix suddenly shouted and pointed her index finger to the front. Arturia quickly turned her gaze to the front and saw a white-haired man with white clothing standing in the middle of the road. Her instinct that she got screamed at her the moment she saw the man. Stop! Arturia shouted and stopped her ground dragon. However, the troop behind her didn't hear her shout. Wilhelm stood on his ground dragon and turned to the troops. Stop your march. Arturia's gaze stayed on the man, and Crush was also looked at the man with worry on her eyes. Who is that? Asked Crush. Arturia jumped down of her ground dragon and put her left hand on the handle of Caliban. I don't know, but he's dangerous. Stay here, I will talk to him. Arturia-sama, that's dangerous. We don't know who he is. Crush shouted and trying to stop Arturia. Arturia stepped forward, ignoring Crush's warning, and made her way to the man. It was strange that Reinhard was nowhere to be seen, and it was strange that Reinhard will ignore the man that stood in front of her. When Arturia reached 5 meters in front of the man, she asked. Who might you be? I see, you don't know who I am. I also don't know who you are until a few days ago, I did know the woman behind you though. You are a candidate to be the next ruler of this nation. And who might you be? This is my second time questioning you. You are different from the other, I see. You didn't violate my right to speak. But, isn't it rude to ask for my name when you didn't introduce yourself yet? Even if the man in front of her is dangerous, Arturia saw the man's point. With her left hand still holding Caliban's handle, Arturia said. My name is Arturia Pendragon, the Night Princess and the candidate of the next king of Lugnica. I see. What a magnificent title. Allow me to introduce myself, Sin Archpriest of the Witches' Cult, representing Greed, Regulus Corneas. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. Arturia unsheathed Caliban without saying anything and shouted. Wilhelm. I leave the one in the rear to you. Wilhelm, who heard Arturia shout, immediately jumped down from his ground dragon and made his way toward the rear. Arturia took a battle stance and looked at Regulus with a serious face, ready for whatever the man had. You see, I hate fighting. Why do you pointing your sword at me? Regulus said with an annoyed face. I heard almost everything about witch cult, and I found what your organization did as something unpleasant, destroying, pillaging, killing the civilians and wanting to revive the witch that wanted to destroy the world. Are you sane? Regulus' scowl deepened and he raised his chin. I never did that. You didn't hear me, right? I hate fighting. Then why are you blocking our way? The killing intent that you have toward us, it apparent. Shouted Arturia as she gripped her Caliban tighter. Arturia still had a lot of mana left, but Caliban can't handle any more big attack from her. She had pushed Caliban to the limit in the battle against Hakugiai, and now Caliban need time to fix the damage from the attack. If possible, Arturia wanted to have a talk with the man in front of her, but although she was naive, she wasn't a fool. The man in front of her that called himself Sin Archbishop of which cult was dangerous. It's strange, I never had any intention about it at all. As Regulus said that, an explosion happened from the rear where Wilhelm headed to. Crush, who was surprised by the appearance of the witch cult, snapped out of her thought and turned to look at the rear. Arturia still looking at Regulus without breaking eye contact. It was a dangerous situation, so Arturia chose to believe in her comrade behind her. She will believe in Wilhelm. But that didn't last long. Wilhelm's body was blown away from the rear and crashed on Arturia's right, not far from where she's standing. Arturia immediately looked at her right and saw Wilhelm's bloodied hand. Felix, as an experienced knight and healer, immediately made his way toward Wilhelm and jumped down his ground dragon to heal him. In that instant moment, an invisible attack reached Arturia, but it was blocked by her magic resistance, showing that something invisible that hit her was magic, and it was magic below B rank. "Ho, you were able to block that." Regulus expressed his surprise with only his expression. His hand was still raised. It was because he used his hand to attack Arturia with his ability. "What is that?" asked Arturia as she lowered her stance. "Pendragon Sama, be careful. There are two of them." Wilhelm used all his strength to stand up and warned Arturia. "Wilhelm, leave the rest to me, for now, you must recover your wound." Crush gallantly jumped down from her ground dragon and unsheathed her sword as she looked to the rear. A strange person with long dark green hair and a dark blue coat walked from the rear toward their direction while holding two bloodied knives. He had sharp teeth and he was slouching as he walked toward them. "Oh my. I keep eating but it's not enough," the man shouted as he kept walking. Crush took her stance and shouted, "Who are you? Identify yourself." As the man walked, the troops that came back from the expedition began to run toward him with their swords raised and attacked him. The hunchback man unexpectedly just walking, but when the troops reached him, Crush realized something. "Stop!" she shouted on top of her lungs, but it was late. The hunchback man moved at a fast speed and killed all the people that attacked him. Corpses collapsed and filled the ground, and the man finally introduced himself. Sin, Archbishop of the witch cult, representing gluttony, Lie Kaioshin. "Archbishop?" gasped Crush in surprise. "But, why did two archbishops from the witch cult in this place? What is your goal?" "We came here because we heard our pet had been slain, but look at this bounty. I expected them to be of good quality considering they managed to kill a beast that had been rampaging for 400 years. But this is beyond my expectation. Especially that man who attacked me first. He's amazing. Making me want to eat him even more. Enough. If you took a step forward again, I will kill you," Crush said as she pointed her sword towards Lie. "Oh. I'm looking forward to it." While Crush engaged Lie Kaioshin, Arturia was too focused on Regulus to know what happened behind her. "You don't want to join them? I assure you that I am nothing like them. I hate fighting," said Regulus as he raised both of his hands. "Unfortunately, I am not confident to leave you out of sight. If I compare the two of you, then you are stronger than him. I, as the strongest person in this place, will look out for your movement," said Arturia as she accumulated mana, preparing mana burst at any moment's notice. "That's unfortunate." Regulus shrugged his shoulder and shook his head. "Well, our pet was killed, so I wanted to get back at least a little too." As soon as Regulus said that, he moved his hand 2 times. Arturia saw his movement because it was rather slow compared to the usual knight, but he can't see his attack. As soon as he moved his hand, Arturia could feel a slash on her right shoulder and left stomach. She looked down on her stomach and saw a scratch on her dress, which was stronger than armor. Her eyes widened in surprise and she changed her stance to protect her from slashes with her sword. If that attack earlier managed to scratch her even with her magic resistance, then that attack is dangerous, very dangerous. "Wilhelm, Felix, run from here. Gain some distance from us, he even managed to bypass my magic resistance," said Arturia with a serious tone. Both of them didn't say anything, but they gritted their teeth and walked away from Arturia and Regulus. Felix kept healing the injured Wilhelm, and Crush still held her ground against Lie while being helped by the other knights and mercenaries. "Amazing. You didn't get injured even after taking that attack. I am intrigued, really intrigued," shouted Regulus with a crazy smile. "I can't hold back against him," thought Arturia. She looked at her sword for a second before focusing her gaze on Regulus. "I'm sorry in advance if I break you, Caliban," muttered Arturia. Regulus stood up and brushed his clothes from the dust. He was surprised that there was someone who was able to do something to him, even more throwing him away. Lie was more surprised than Regulus. He didn't expect someone with that much mastery in magic to show themselves and threw Regulus away. "You said you are Merlin. What is your relationship with Arturia-sama?" asked Crush as she jumped towards Merlin, her gaze focused on Lie. Wilhelm also walked toward Merlin and Crush with Felix. Felix as the healer immediately looked at Arturia's condition, which was not the best one now. He was about to heal Arturia, but he was stopped by Merlin. "No need to heal her," said Merlin. He moved his right hand and a sword with a blue hilt and golden sword guard appeared on his hand. The sword was sheathed inside a blue and golden sheath. It radiated more mana if it was compared to Arturia's previous sword, Caliban, which was already strong. "What's that sword?" asked Crush as her eyes widened in surprise. The enemy, Regulus, and Lie also narrowed their eyes when they saw the sword that was taken out by Merlin. He put the sword and its sheath on top of Arturia, moved her hand to clutch into the sword, and smiled. "I noticed that Caliban was destroyed, so I came here to give you this sword, my king. It's time for you to wield Excalibur." As Arturia held the sword in her hand, her wound was healed at a visible rate. The wound moved to close itself, surprising the other who watched it. "Hey, I hate being ignored like this," said Regulus as he scowled. "Ha ha 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 ha, amazing. I want to eat you, and eat you so badly," shouted Lie in madness. Merlin stood straight and whispered to Crush without looking at her. "Can I leave that green one to you? It seems the white one is stronger." Crush nodded her head without even doubting his words. "Leave him to us." Merlin also nodded his head and then unsheathed the Excalibur that was held by Arturia. Her wound was healed, so he take the sword back, for now. He held Excalibur. "It's time to utilize my field of expertise." As soon as Merlin said that, he kicked the ground and disappeared from where he was before. The knights, Wilhelm, and Crush who saw him were surprised. They didn't know, no, they never expected that a magician can move that fast. More importantly, did he just take Pendragon Sama's sword? Exclaimed Wilhelm. Merlin who disappeared had appeared again in front of Regulus and stabbed his stomach with Excalibur. However, the attack did nothing to Regulus, it only made him scowled even further. "Is this it?" asked Regulus as he looked down at Merlin. Regulus moved his hand, but Merlin was faster. He used Excalibur to deflect Regulus's hand and pointed his wand at Regulus. "Swordplay isn't really my forte," said Merlin with a smile. From the tip of his wand, pink light gathered and it became a beam that was shot toward Regulus's face directly. Excalibur disappeared from his hand and appeared back on its sheath. Merlin then pulled the sword that was sheathed in his wand and attacked Regulus once again. "This sword seems to be enough to fight you, seeing you fell into my trick easily." The beam stopped and Merlin was surprised when he saw Regulus still unharmed from his attack. Regulus's expression turned ugly as he was angry. He grabbed sands from the ground and threw them towards Merlin. "This is a bit bad," muttered Merlin. The sand stopped mid-air and attacked Merlin as it did to Arturia earlier. The sand stabbed Merlin's body mercilessly, and Merlin collapsed on the ground. "TCH. How dare a weak magician tries to kill me?" grumbled Regulus as he fixed his clothes that were disheveled from Merlin's attack. "Merlin Naya!" Felix shouted as he saw Merlin who was collapsed on the ground. But, a second later, pink flowers filled the area and Merlin's body turned into a flower. He then reappeared beside Arturia and looked at Regulus with a smile. I see. He stopped time," exclaimed Merlin. "But it's strange, when I stabbed him, there is a resistance, but he was not injured," added Merlin as he touched his chin with his right hand. Regulus smiled as he looked at Merlin. "Ha ha ha ha, this is the first time that someone uncovers my power in our first meeting. I will take the praise, but it seems my king's knight has arrived." With Merlin's word, the situation of the battlefield immediately changed. Someone who knew about Arturia's knight had their spirit reignited. "If it's him, then we will win," filled their thought. While that was true, the person himself had no confidence to win against Regulus. At least not directly. But as a knight, that person, Reinhard van Astria, will do his best to protect his lady. From the distance, he jumped off his ground dragon and used all his strength to jump toward his lady. He landed right beside Merlin, who suddenly appeared in front of him earlier and told him that Arturia Pendragon was in danger. A cloud of smoke was created by Reinhard's landing, it filled the area but soon was dispersed by Merlin's magic. "It seems that I am late, please forgive me," said Reinhard as he dusted off his clothes. He looked at Arturia who was unconscious beside him and had a bitter expression. Well, this situation has turned bad," said Regulus as he spread his arms. Lie, who saw Reinhard, also slowly backed off and walked towards Regulus. He stood on Regulus's right as the knights who were still able to fight made their way behind Reinhard. Wilhelm and Crush stood beside Reinhard and Merlin, ready to fight the two Sin Archbishops in front of them. Reinhard looked at Regulus and Lie before he said, "If you would kindly leave, then I will not pursue you." At the first glance, Reinhard knew who the people in front of him were. They were bad news, and it would be best if they left quietly without causing more damage to them. "If you say so, then we will leave. I hate fighting, so that was enough," answered Regulus. "I appreciate it." The two archbishops turned around and walked away, leaving the wrecked expedition's troops away. After they were out of sight, Crush sheathed her sword and asked, "Why did you let them leave, Sir Reinhard?" Reinhard was about to answer Crush's question, but he was interrupted by Merlin. Now, let's talk about that later, okay? My king needs her rest, and so you too." He tapped his wand on the ground and the flowers that surrounded the area disappeared. Crush was speechless, but she nodded her head and followed what Merlin said. It was true, everyone need to rest, and it was not a time to talk about that. Reinhard turned to Merlin and bowed his head. "You have my appreciation. Thank you for saving Milady." Merlin waved his right hand at Reinhard with a smile. "Don't mind it, it was my duty to guide her to become a splendid king." Reinhard raised his head and then smiled. "As expected, you are that Merlin in Milady's story." "Right. I am that Merlin. Now, you need to rest too, sleep well, the first night." I am counting on you while I am resting, great magician Merlin." Merlin laughed at Reinhard and said, "It was nothing, also, I am Magus of Flower, not great magician." The troops had suffered a lot of casualties in the fight with Sin Archbishops. Church estimated that there were at least 20 knights and 30 mercenaries that fell in the battle with Liebatten Katos. The spirit of the troops had hit the lowest, but it was reignited when the magician, Merlin, appeared out of nowhere and Reinhard chased the archbishops away. She then ordered the troops to rest, and it was now nighttime. The troops made a tent and lit a bonfire to keep them warm. There were two big tents, one of them was for Crush while the other was for Arturia, who had yet regained her consciousness. Inside Arturia's tent, she was sleeping in her dress on the flower bed that Merlin made for her. She still held Excalibur and Avalon close to her chest while the destroyed Caliban was stabbed on the ground beside her, resting in peace waiting for its previous owner to wake up. Merlin and Reinhard sat on tree trunks that were made by Merlin near Arturia. "If I may ask, why did her sword break?" "That sword, Caliban, is a good sword that almost rivaled my own sword." "But why did it break easily?" Reinhard asked Merlin as he looked at the broken Caliban. That was a good question. That sword is a sword to choose a king. It was more like a ceremonial sword rather than a sword to fight. Even so, that's a good sword on its own. Merlin explained as he raised his index finger and closed his eyes. But that didn't explain why the sword break when she fight the archbishop. Merlin opened his eyes and had a serious look on his face. "There are two instances makes Caliban break." Merlin extended his left hand that was raised to Reinhard. "First, if Caliban is employed in battle as a weapon, and its true name released, it will be able to make an attack that's greater than anything. It can destroy a city in one attack. But, the blade will not be able to handle Arturia's magical energy and will break after one attack." Reinhard nodded his head. He saw the power that his lady unleashed in the fight against Hakugi, and he saw the aftermath of her fight with the archbishop. The grounds were gouged here and there, and it was a mess. Compared to the fight against Hakugi, the scale of the destruction in the area after the fight with the archbishops was greater. So, he guessed that his lady had released an attack stronger than what she used against Hakugi. Second, in this instance, it related to Arturia more than the sword. If the rules of chivalry were broken by Arturia, then Caliban will break. I told her that she will no longer be human when she was about to pull that sword out of the stone. She knew about it, but she chose to keep her chivalry as a knight because she was stubborn. Merlin smiled as he remembered the time when Arturia pulled Caliban in front of him. "Now that I give her Excalibur, be prepared for a little bit of a change, oh the first night." "Change?" Reinhard was confused by what the magician in front of him said. "Indeed, it always happens. When Caliban was broken, my king will have a change in her view. Albeit a little, she will understand how the world works. It was natural. People change, so Reinhard had also expected a change in Arturia's view, but not this fast. He thought that Arturia maybe needs some time. When he thought that, a groan came from Arturia who sleep on the flower bed. "Ugh! Reinhard spent no time and stood up instantly. He looked at Arturia and saw her moving, trying to get up as she held her head. "Where?" asked Arturia as she sat and looked around. She saw Reinhard first because he stood right in front of her, and he didn't see Merlin who sat on the left because Reinhard's body obstructed her sight. "Milady, you have woken up," said Reinhard with a smile on his face. "Sir Reinhard?" Arturia finally sobered up and was able to think clearly again. Her expression immediately paled and was about to jump down the bed. She didn't jump though, as she realized that she held something in her right hand. With narrowed eyes, Arturia looked at the thing that she held in her hand, and then she remembered. "This is... right, Merlin." "Yes, Merlin is here, my king," Merlin said in a joking tone as he waved his left hand. Arturia turned to Merlin immediately and widened her eyes. "Merlin?" asked Arturia. She was unsure if the Merlin in front of her is the same Merlin that she knew. She was still holding her head with her left hand because it was still throbbing in pain. The pain was not from injuries, but it came from her brain. For some reason, unknown memories had popped up in Arturia's mind for a while now. The first time she met with the man with white hair in front of her. The time she pulled a sword in a stone while wearing a white shirt and blue pants. That man was standing behind her wearing a white hood as his long hair swayed by the wind. "Yes, my king. This is Merlin, the one who witnessed Caliban pulled from the stone." The sight of Merlin with his usual jokester smile had calmed Arturia down. She then looked at the thing, the sword on her hand again, and muttered. "Could this be Excalibur, as you've known?" added Merlin. Arturia was surprised and looked at Merlin. He was closing his eyes and faced Arturia with a kind smile on his face. She then realized that Merlin had known everything. But even then, he came to this place and helped her. "Thank you, Merlin." Arturia smiled and then slowly get off the flower bed. Reinhard helped her silently. The Excalibur that was on her hand was now strapped on her waist. She then noticed the broken Caliban on the ground and crouched. "I'm sorry," said Arturia as she extended her hand and touched Caliban's handle. As soon as she touched it, the sword shattered into pieces of light and fly away as it disappeared into thin air. She then turned her gaze into Merlin and looked at him seriously. "What's your plan from now on, Merlin?" Merlin hugged his wand and touched his chin. He then smiled and stood up from his seat and approached Arturia. "I guess I will help to make a princess knight into a king." "So that mean?" Arturia exclaimed happily at Merlin's answer. "Yes, I guess I will stick around you for now. This world is more turbulent than I thought." "I see, it's nice to have you at my side, Merlin." Reinhard smiled happily at Arturia's side as he watched his lady manage to get a reliable ally. The future was still uncertain, for now, he could only do his best for his lady. The remaining troops had arrived at the capital with a smile on their face. They were welcomed by the civilians who watched from the side of the road. In front of the troops were Arturia and Crush. Behind them were Reinhard and Felix as the knight of the candidates followed by Wilhelm and Merlin. Merlin was walking beside Wilhelm, with a reason that he can't control the ground dragon and somehow the ground dragon refused Merlin riding them. Arturia laughed at Merlin when he was kicked by the ground dragon and the way back after getting attacked by 2 Sin Archbishops was peaceful. As the troops were happy with the subjugation result and their safety for reaching the capital, a knight was running from the distance and stopped in front of the troops, blocking their way. The knight had sweated over his face, it served as proof that he was hurried to this place. He put his right hand over his chest and his left hand on his back and bowed. He then looked at Arturia and Crush with his right hand still on his chest. "Welcome back, Pendragon-sama, Karsten-sama. I am called Gerard, ordered by the Sage Council to ask for Sir Reinhard and Sir Felix to report to the Sage Council immediately. Sage Council knows that it is rude behavior and both knights needed rest, but this is an urgent matter. Please forgive them." Arturia looked at Crush for a second. She saw Crush nodded her head and then turned to the knight in front of her. "All right." After answering the knight, Arturia turned to Reinhard and told him what happened. Crush also did the same to Felix. Both of them then nodded their head and followed the knight who ran towards the troops earlier to the castle. After they were gone, the troops began to march back to the Karsten mansion while Arturia split herself and went back to the Astria mansion with Merlin. Because they were surrounded by the troops as soon as they met, Arturia had no chance to ask Merlin, but now they were alone. So Arturia looked at Merlin and asked. "You know that I am not really Arturia, right Merlin?" Merlin was surprised by Arturia's question. Maybe he didn't expect that she will ask him directly, but his surprise quickly turned into a smile. No, you are Arturia. Even though you had memories of another life or even the other, your core is Arturia Pendragon. I have no doubt about that. Arturia was silent and looked at the road ahead of her after hearing Merlin's answer. She knew that she had a splitting appearance as Saber in her youth, but she just thought that as a coincidence. That was one of the reasons why she loved the figure of Arturia Pendragon in her original world. So the reason why I gained more memories was the memories just came back to me as I got used to this world instead of getting new memories of Arturia Pendragon. Merlin nodded his head once and confirmed Arturia's question, that's correct. But, why did it come back to me after I had arrived in this world? Why didn't it come back earlier when I was in my original world? Arturia asked all the questions that she bottled up since she arrived in this world. She had no one to lean for except for Reinhard. But even so, she can't tell Reinhard about all of her secrets. Now, Merlin who knew her secret from the start had arrived. So she kind of vented all her frustration and worry that she accumulated since she arrived in this world to Merlin. I had no time to rest, always thinking that those memories that I gained right after I arrived in this world were foreign and always worried that myself would change without me realizing it. Do you know how hard was that? The road that they were in was devoid of people. It was a road that led to the Arturia mansion, and no one dared to step into the land of Noble without any permission. That was why Merlin just looked at Arturia with a kind smile on his face as if he was an older brother who listened to his sister rambling. And finally you arrived. Why? Why did you arrive so late, Merlin? Arturia was not Arturia Pendragon, the king of knights yet. She was a weak girl right now, the weak girl with strength that was trying her best to become a king. I promised that I will become a king that will not regret anything. But why? I seriously wanted to kill that white man just because I thought he will kill me. I was glad when he didn't die, but Caliban still break because it can't handle my mana which wasn't restricted by Gaia and Alea. But, why did you arrive after Caliban break, Merlin? Arturia looked down at her ground dragon and hid her expression from Merlin. The reason why I'm late. Surely you know it, as you now have the memories of that time. Both of them were silent for the rest of their way back to the mansion. Using that short time, Arturia managed to recover from all that she said earlier and took a deep breath before jumping down the ground dragon. They had arrived at the mansion, and Arturia just entered it like usual as she had been here for more than a week. She also had the key to the mansion from Reinhard, as it will be inconvenient if she wasn't able to enter the mansion when Reinhard wasn't with her. They entered the house and Arturia brought Merlin to the library. She sat on the chair that she often used when she was learning about this world from Reinhard and asked Merlin to sit on the chair that Reinhard often used. He sat while leaning his wand against the bookshelf and looked at Arturia. Well then, you can ask what you want, my king. Arturia closed her eyes and took a deep breath before opening her eyes and looking at Merlin with a serious gaze. Where are we exactly? Where are we exactly? Merlin raised his index finger and smiled. I honestly don't know where are we. It's a different world. Because Merlin answered with a tone that looked like he was joking, Arturia sighed and crossed her arms. I know that this place is a different world. But, how different this world compared to Earth? Really different. First, this world has an edge. From that edge, Giant's waterfall fell to nothingness that's still a mystery for this world. It seems the world was not originally like this. Arturia nodded her head at Merlin's explanation. From the history book that she read in the library of this mansion, she found out about something. Half of the world was destroyed by a person called Witch of Envy. Say, Merlin, compared to you, how strong is that witch? I wanted to know the strongest entity in this world, so I can prepare myself. I don't want to be ambushed like earlier, not again. Merlin laughed at Arturia and then he pointed at himself. My king, don't worry about being ambushed again. Do you forget that the most graceful Grand Caster is on your side? Arturia's eyes widened slightly before she closed them and smiled. She remembered the thing that all Grand Caster, or Grand Caster candidate had in common. Clairvoyance. All Grand Caster candidate had clairvoyance. Solomon can see the past and the future. King Gilgamesh had Shah Nakba Imuru which can predict the future. While Merlin, being the Grand Caster himself also had a clairvoyance that was above the ordinary caster level. That's true. You have that clairvoyance, the eyes which can see through the world. Not only that, as this is another world, that means you don't use your magical energy to observe the whole world. That's correct. You can say that I came from a different timeline from the other. I am just me, and my job is to make a king. Merlin spread his arms and had a big smile on his face. His eyes were glistening, and he looked at Arturia with the gaze of an older brother. It was strange for Arturia, but she trusted Merlin even though it was the first time she met him. She didn't know if it was because of her new memories, but she felt like Merlin was a close friend, someone who has been together with her for a long time. Then I will ask you, Merlin. Can you watch what Sir Reinhard do right now? I trust him, but I don't trust the Sage Council. I see. The Sage Council holds the power in place of the missing royalty. I will do as you wish, my king. As Merlin said that, he closed his eyes and used his clairvoyance. Arturia looked at the movement of mana inside the room and saw that the mana was concentrated on Merlin's surroundings. The effect was brief, but because of Arturia's sensitivity towards mana, she was able to feel it. A few seconds later, Merlin opened his eyes and crossed his legs while putting his hands on top of his thighs. He smiled and said, "It seems that things are going to be interesting in a few days." What do you mean? Well, your knight will inform you in a few minutes. But, I will tell you right now. Reinhard arrived in his mansion and opened the gate. When the gate was opened, he saw Arturia and Merlin standing right beyond the gate. Arturia was wearing the night clothes while Merlin was still wearing his magus clothes, but he put his hoodie on. "Shall we go?" asked Arturia as she stepped forward, exited the gate. Reinhard didn't know what happened, but then Merlin approached him and patted him on his shoulder. "We need to hurry, right? Let's go, Sir Knight." He was still confused, but Reinhard nodded his head at Merlin and then turned to follow Arturia. They caught up to Arturia and then Reinhard asked, "How did you know?" "I was just told by the Sage Council about it earlier." "Ha ha ha, there is nothing that I don't know." Merlin used his sight. "If that disturbs you, then I apologize, Sir Reinhard. While I trust you, I don't know what those in Sage Council would pull, so I asked Merlin to spy on them." Reinhard's eyes widened and then he smiled. "I see, so the gaze that I felt was you?" he asked Merlin as he raised his right hand. "Ho ho, as expected you can feel that." "Yes, that was me. Truthfully, I was surprised when you glanced in my direction. And I also got surprised when I felt someone watching us. But because I thought that the one who watched was an ally, I didn't cut it down on spot." "Ha ha ha, my king was the one who asked me. By the way, must I introduce myself at the party?" "No, let's change the question. How should I introduce myself at the party?" Merlin asked Arturia and Reinhard. Arturia was planning to introduce Merlin at this party when he said that the Sage Council will hold the celebratory party because the expedition troops managed to kill Hakugiai and drove away 2 Sin Archbishops. Merlin's question was also a problem. How should Arturia introduce Merlin? She had introduced herself as someone from beyond the waterfall, from Great Britain. Should she introduce Merlin as the magician from her country? No, that's a fool thing to do. Let's tell them honestly. "Merlin, I hope you don't mind performing the party." Merlin was smart. He immediately knew what Arturia had planned and give her his best smile. "Sure, a little magecraft to introduce myself is preferable." Arturia nodded her head at Merlin's answer. But then, this time Reinhard was confused. He heard an unknown word, and so he asked. "Magecraft?" Arturia and Merlin looked at Reinhard at the same time and Arturia realized that Merlin had slipped an unknown word for Reinhard. She face-bombed and then said, "Explain it to Sir Reinhard about magecraft, Merlin." Merlin stopped on his track and shouted. "Me? It's my fault." Arturia ignored Merlin and walked at a faster pace than before. Reinhard smiled wryly and scratched his cheek. Merlin sighed and then he caught up to them and began explaining about magecraft to Reinhard. He just told him the basics, but Reinhard understood Merlin's explanation as if he was a sponge absorbing the knowledge instantly. The party of 3 arrived at the castle and they were welcome to enter. The one who welcomed them asked for Merlin's name to announce that they had arrived. When they entered the party venue, Merlin tapped the tip of his staff against the floor, and pink flowers appeared from thin air, filling the party venue. One of the king candidate, Arturia Pendragon Sama. With her knight and magician, Reinhard von Astria and Merlin have arrived. The announcement made all participants look at them. Instantly, they were the focus of the party and Arturia smiled warmly to give a good impression to the people who attended the party. Merlin smiled when he saw the reaction of the participants of the party. The flowers were still in the air, and from the distance, Arturia saw Crush looking at them with a smile on her face. Arturia smiled back at Crush and made her way towards her. No one greeted Arturia, mainly because they were still admiring the flowers that appeared at the same time as Arturia's entrance. But all of them were Merlin's work. He made the flowers bloom on the path that Arturia took as if she was blessed by the nature. That sight managed to gain aspiration from many, and they secretly admired Arturia and her group. A lot of girls admired Arturia. Even so, that was only a quarter of the girls that attended the party. Because the rest of them were admiring Reinhard and Merlin. Arturia was still smiling on the outside, but she was actually worried on the inside. What if the girls wanted to target Merlin? Ah, no, they have targeted Merlin already. She asked inside her mind. That would be problematic, at the same time that would benefit her. She has gotten used to this world, but she still has a lot of burdens that she hid deep inside her heart. Arturia stopped in front of Crush and gestured to Merlin with her hand to stop his show. Merlin tapped his wand twice and the flowers that filled the room disappeared in a mote of pink light. That was amazing. Praised Crush as she looked at the flowers that were in the middle of disappearing. Crush was wearing a green dress instead of her usual military uniform. Her hair was also tied in a bun, while Felix was standing behind Crush, waving his hand toward Reinhard and Arturia. Merlin no 1 or 2 party trick. That's why to entertain the guests, I asked him to show one of his best tricks. Arturia glanced at Merlin and he bowed his head to Crush. He knew his position well, and he acted accordingly. Even so, he kept his hoodie on, even though he knew that it was rude. I have no chance to formally introduce myself. My name is Merlin, I am a magus that served under Arturia-sama. It's my pleasure meeting you. Merlin's bow was beautiful. He put his left hand on his chest and bowed his 45 degrees towards Crush. From the other's view, he was bowing out of respect. It managed to increase Merlin's good impression in the other's eyes. Merlin raised his head after a few seconds and smiled. It's nice to meet you. I am Crush Karsten, the head of the Karsten family and one of the king candidates. I am thankful for your assistance during the attack of 2 Sin Archbishops. Crush's voice was loud enough to be heard by everyone in the hall. Some of them let out a surprised yelp while the others were looking at Merlin with awe. A single magician who managed to drive 2 Sin Archbishops away. That was a huge feat that not any average magician can do. They were even skeptical whether Roswell, who was hailed as the greatest magician in Lugnica, was able to do that. It was nothing. I did what I wanted to do, and that's assisting my king. Even so, you saved us from the destruction and saved our lives. For that, I am really thankful. Crush nodded her head a little as she can't bow to another candidate's man. If she bowed to him in public, that would hurt her reputation. Well then, I will receive your gratitude. Merlin nodded his head at Crush. Arturia then looked at Crush and asked. By the way, Crush-sama. How did you arrive at this party before me? Arturia was waiting for Reinhard because she knew from Merlin that there will be a party. But Crush was different. It was because I knew that there will be a party from the start. So I prepared myself while waiting for Felix. Not to mention, my mansion was not that far from the castle. I see, so that's how it is. Thought Arturia. Well then, Crush-sama. I won't impose on you any longer. Yes, Arturia-sama. I heard that there will be an announcement about the expedition from the Sage Council later, please look forward to it. Crush smiled at Arturia. Arturia smiled back at Crush and said. I am looking forward to it. She then turned around and looked at the table that was full of food in the distance. Reinhard, who brought meals for Arturia every day, has noticed the look on Arturia's face. She was focused on the meal and looked like she will jump to the food at any time. Milady, you don't mean? He asked Arturia, and her body stiffened while turning to Reinhard slowly. Whatever do you mean, my knight? Reinhard smiled wryly and scratched his cheek. No, milady. It's my imagination. Anyway, Merlin. Arturia looked back to talk to Merlin. But, unknown to both of them, Merlin was not following them anymore. Arturia turned confused and surveyed the room. She saw Merlin was surrounded by a bunch of girls from noble families and looked troubled. When his gaze met with Arturia, he sent a signal of help by blinking his eyes. Arturia smiled at Merlin and raised her thumb up. With her lips, she sent a message to Merlin. Rope them in with your charm, Merlin. That way we can gain more connection with noble. Merlin, who can read Arturia's lips movement, smiled wryly and let out a dry laugh. Reinhard looked at his lady and then at Merlin. Merlin saw Reinhard look at him this time and sent another signal. Reinhard was about to approach Merlin, but he was stopped by Arturia, who shook her head. He then looked back at Merlin and gave him an encouraging smile. Both of them walked away, and then Arturia saw a lot of nobles begin approaching Crush in the distance. She had a rather bad feeling, and she saw that some of the nobles were looking at her. Well then, Sir Reinhard. It seems that we will be surrounded too before long. Ha ha ha, it can't be helped, milady. True to her words, the nobles began to greet her and gave flattery words. Arturia returned their greeting one by one. She was not bothered by them and can answer all of their questions without any problem. She now had new memories and she understood the conduct of the nobles. Before long, all the nobles were satisfied and the door of the party venues opened once again. Arturia looked at the door and saw the Sage Council enter the party venue. Only 2 people from the Sage Council attended the party. Those 2 were Miklatov McMahon as the representative of the Sage Council and Bordeaux Zelgef. Those 2 walked to the chairs that were located in the middle of the party venue and sat in that place. Arturia looked at them while having complicated expressions. What's wrong, milady? Reinhard asked Arturia with a worried tone. Arturia looked at Reinhard and shook her head. Nothing. By the way, is Merlin able to free himself from the crowd? I have nothing to worry about, my king. Merlin's voice rang from Arturia's left, surprising her. She turned to the source of the voice and saw Merlin lowered his hood even further with his right hand. That was intense. I thought that the noble in this party will be able to hold themselves. Ha ha ha. I know your feeling. Reinhard let out a dry laugh and gave Merlin a sympathetic look. Merlin smiled at Reinhard and let out a sigh of resignation. So you experienced those things too? My condolences. That was in the past. Now, no girls ever approached me. Not since I got my power. Reinhard looked down at his raised right hand that he clenched. Merlin looked at Reinhard as if he understood what happened and patted him on his shoulder. I understand. But, I guess the situation has improved since my king made you her knight? Certainly. I am grateful to Arturia-sama for taking this inexperienced knight to be her first knight. Merlin, Sir Reinhard. It seems they are about to announce something. Arturia's voice interrupted their conversation and both of them turned to look at the Sage Council. One of the Sage Council's members, Miklatov McMahon, stood up and raised his right hand. I hope for taking a little of your time to announce something. His voice rang out clear in the party venue. The guests immediately shut their mouths and their attention was focused on Miklatov. Crush made her way to Arturia and she stopped beside Arturia to listen to the announcement. There will be an extra announcement besides our achievement for taking down Hakugiai. Crush suddenly said to Arturia without taking her eyes off Miklatov. Arturia nodded her head. She knew about it because Merlin had told her, but she still didn't know what the other announcement was. We are gathering here to celebrate. To celebrate that one of the beasts that terrorized us for more than 400 years has been slain. A murmur from the guests filled the party venue in an instant. They have been informed about it, hence they were talking to the other nobles beside them to talk about it. But Miklatov wasn't done yet. Silence. He shouted and the murmur immediately died down. Let me continue. This is a big achievement. The expedition of Hakugiai, one of the 3 beasts, was led by 2 of our king candidates. Please give your best applaud to Crush Karsten-sama and Arturia Pendragon-sama. As soon as Miklatov said that, he raised his left hand and pointed it to Arturia and Crush that stood a little bit away in her left. He also turned to them and smiled. The attention of the party shifted to Arturia and Crush as the guests clapped their hands to congratulate them. Crush smiled and raised her hand to wave at them. Arturia also smiled, but she didn't raise her hand. She closed her eyes instead and gave them a little nod. The applause lasted for a while until it was stopped by Miklatov. He lowered his left hand and said, "There is something more." The guests turned their attention to Miklatov again. Bordeaux, who just sat beside Miklatov earlier, stood up and announced. We received information that the individual called Natsuki Subaru, the butler of Mather's house and member of Emilia camp, has managed to defeat one of the witch cult Sin Archbishop with the help of the finest knight, Julius Jaculius from Anastasia camp. Woo-wah! A shout of amazement rang out and filled the room. They were surprised that in one day, 2 big events happened. So he did it. Arturia's tone was filled with happiness. She was glad that the boy managed to defeat one of the Sin Archbishops. After meeting 2 of them, Arturia comes to know the strength of the Sin Archbishops. For a boy that asked her help to be able to defeat one of them, it was truly a big achievement. I see, so that's how it is. The informant, it was that boy, huh? Exclaimed Crush as she turned to Arturia. Yes, he somehow knows about the attack of Witch Cult. So he asked me to help him. I can't help him directly, but when he said something about Hakugi, I decided to help him by defeating the Hakugi. And it certainly isn't a coincidence. There is a possibility that Subaru has something like clairvoyance. I must ask Merlin later. Arturia glanced at Merlin and he instantly understood and nodded his head. There is another one. This is still related to the witch cult. Miklatov said, and the guests looked at him with an expectant gaze. 2 big announcements have been announced, they were expecting another announcement that can surprise them again. 2 Sin Archbishops from Witch Cult have made their appearance in our kingdom. It was reported that Arturia Pendragon-sama managed to chase them away with the help of an unknown magician. It seems that the unknown magician is attending this party. Miklatov looked at Merlin who stood behind Arturia with a serious gaze. I hope you can introduce yourself to us. Unfortunately, I, as the representative of Sage Council, can't let unknown man with immense strength loitering around our kingdom. Unless you have a clear identity, I must ask you to leave our kingdom at once. From his serious tone, Arturia knew that he wasn't joking. She then looked at Merlin and nodded her head. Merlin nodded back to Arturia and looked at Miklatov. He took off his hood and smiled before putting his right hand on his chest and bowed a little. Nice to meet you. I am sorry for my late introduction. Merlin said, and then he raised his head. My name is Merlin, a magus of flower. I am serving as Arturia Pendragon-sama's tutor in Britain. One day, I found her to be missing, so I made my own choice and searched for her. When I come to find her, I noticed that she was attacked and decided to help my king fending her enemies. Tutor, was it? How can a tutor hold so much power? Asked Miklatov. Although I said tutor, I was more like a king-maker. In another word, I taught one how to become king. Arturia held her urge to facepalm. How can Merlin just say the truth that was hard to believe with a smile on his face? He didn't seem to be bothered by the gaze of the people that looked at him as if he was stupid. I see, so in other words, you are a royal magician from this Britain, Pendragon-sama's homeland. Merlin touched his chin as if he was troubled. But then, he smiled and lowered his hand. That's correct. Maybe that position called royal magician in this kingdom. Miklatov and Bordeaux seemed to be satisfied with the explanation and nodded their head. Very well, I, as the representative of the Sage Council, will allow Merlin to stay in this kingdom. All announcement has been announced, the guests may enjoy the party to the fullest. Arturia sighed in relief and looked at Merlin. I have something to ask. She said in a low voice. The party ended right before midnight. Arturia, Merlin, and Reinhard went back to Astria's mansion together. Reinhard shows Merlin his room before he retreated for the night. The night in Lugnica was dark. There was almost no light, as the source of the light was only from candle and lantern. However, Arturia chose to visit the library in the middle of the night. She wanted to ask Merlin about something. When Arturia entered the library, Merlin had sat on the chair while reading a book. The tip of his wand was lit. The light from his wand was enough to brighten the library. When Merlin noticed Arturia, he looked at her with a small smile on his face. My king, what do you want to ask? He closed the book in his hand and put it on the table beside him. Arturia walked to the chair on the other side of the table and sat down. I wanted to ask about the boy who gave me information about Hakugi. Merlin was interested. He heard the conversation of Arturia and Crush about the informant. You wanted to ask whether the boy have a clairvoyance to look to the future like King Gilgamesh or Solomon, am I right? Arturia nodded her head. There is a possibility that he's part of the witch cult too. I can see a dark aura surrounding his body when he approached me that day. The aura that I didn't see in our first meeting. Merlin stroked his chin with his right hand as he crossed her leg. Interesting. Then there is a possibility that the boy was possessed. Can you describe the dark aura that surrounded the boy? I remembered it clearly because it was strange. When I met him, his expression was filled with despair. His eyes were not focused, and he was like a madman who just returned from the battlefield after losing his loved one. Arturia dug into her new memories and now she understood Subaru's expression that she saw that time. In her new memories which she gained after she received Excalibur, she was in a few wars against the enemy of Britain. In that memory, a lot of soldiers who lost their loved ones in front of their eyes often broke down and despaired. The look on Subaru's face that time reminded her of those soldiers. So he was experiencing despair. He somehow knew that he can't save someone dear to him that time. Arturia nodded her head at Merlin's presumption. I think so. After I accepted his request, the dark aura that surrounded him at that time began to disappear slowly. His expression brightened and he gained his smile back. If he's experiencing despair that even the experienced soldier got, then it's not clairvoyance. If someone uses clairvoyance to look at the future, they will only know what happened and the feeling is not as real as seeing it directly. Merlin raised his index finger while smiling at Arturia. If he really has clairvoyance, then he will not despair. From my experience, those who have clairvoyance tend to solve the problem themselves, not asking for help unless they desperately needed it. Not only that, they will know in advance that he will succeed in gaining help, which will dispel his despair earlier. Arturia nodded her head at Merlin's explanation. So, the possibility that he was a witch cultist could be erased too. No, there is still a possibility that he's a witch cultist. Looking at the two guys that I met, the witch cultists seem to harbor a big ambition that will involve the royal selection of this kingdom. I think so too. She had suspicion since two of the witch cult's archbishops had blocked their way and knew that two king candidates were amongst the expedition members. They specifically targeted us, but more importantly I think I know their real target. With a serious face, Arturia looked at Merlin. I think they targeted Emilia-sama, one of the king candidates. Her appearance is very similar to how the Witch of Envy described in the book. So their reason for targeting her could be narrowed down. Merlin touched his chin while having a big smile on his face. Yes, and that boy who asked help. His gaze when he met Emilia-sama at that time. Now that I think about it, there is no way he can fall in love that easily. Immediately, huh? My king, could it be that he has that power? That power? She asked in a confused tone. Arturia tilted her head. She didn't understand what Merlin meant by that power. This is just my guess. But maybe he has some power to make him able to experience something from the future. Maybe in a form of dream, revelation, or even direct experience. Merlin looked skeptical when he said it and scratched the back of his head. To be honest, that kind of power is bordering God's power. Even if he has clairvoyance, that instantly makes him a dangerous individual. But, if he has the power to experience the future, or even changed it. Arturia's eyes widened. She put her hand on her chin and said. The one with him by their side will certainly win this selection. But, Merlin. Is that possible? The power to choose the future. I don't know. Merlin shook his head and relaxed his sitting position. However, my king. Don't worry about it. Every power has a weakness. If we somehow know it, then with me by your side I am certain that you will become a king. A splendid one at that. Arturia was also confident. With Merlin, whose one of his abilities was called King Creation, she was confident to win the selection. I don't want to be a splendid king, I wanted to be a kind one. Even though she was not as naive as she was when she hadn't got the set of memories from the other's Arturia Pendragon, she was still pursuing her goal to be a different kind of king from the other Arturia. Merlin closed her eyes, leaned his back against the chair's backrest, and smiled. If that's your choice, then I won't interfere with it. Both of them smiled in silence, unaware of the red-haired knight that was listening to their conversation from outside the library. The knight walked away from the library with a smile on his face. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye-bye.